Welcome back to our special coverage of the extreme solar storm now crossing North America.
But to scientists, it's a dynamic star, constantly in flux, sending energy out into space. Right now, experts say it's in its most active period in 2 decades.
When we're young, we're told not to look at the sun, but there may only be one good exception to this rule: the Aurora Borealis, or Australis. And this last week, hundreds of millions, if not billions of us had possibly our first opportunity to enjoy and witness an immense storm of extreme magnitude. I'm making this video because, as incredible as this opportunity was, many of us may have missed it, but more importantly, we're in a solar maximum, and there's going to be years of activity. So today, we're going somewhere where I've found a clear, dark sky in the hopes of finding Aurora. I want to take this opportunity to walk you guys through what I would consider the basics. This is the functional variables that allow a storm to occur and allow us to predict where, when, and whether we will be able to see one. So let's get outside, let's cover these basics, and if at the end of this video you guys feel more prepared to go out and find the solar winds yourself, then I'll know I've done a good job. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and most importantly, comment down below. If I missed anything, or if there's any questions that you have, I know that I or someone else that watches this video should be able to answer. So don't be shy, let's have a conversation.
All right, so before I get into any of the gear that you're going to want to have, we got to make sure you're actually in a position to see the aurora. And the only way to do that is to make sure you understand the basics of how it works and how to track it. It really boils down to a handful of variables. And if you don't understand them, you're going to be kind of running around like a headless chicken. And that's honestly where most aurora chasers are. The variables start with speed. And this is actually the speed that the solar winds are traveling between the sun and the earth. It's the solar winds' capacity to impact the magnetosphere and the earth with greater velocity. So you can start to see the aurora when you're looking at, solar speeds over 400 kilometers per second. That's where I've actually had a great experience. That said, strong or very fast solar winds in what we might call a big solar storm are going to be moving something more like 600, 700, 800, or even 900 kilometers per second. So that is the speed. Then we get into the KP. The index is a globally accepted standard, and it is more or less a loose way of grouping together storm characteristics and giving the storm an overall strength rating. So this goes on a scale of 0 to 9, 9 being the most extreme, 0 being nothing at all. A storm can start to be visible in the more polar regions, so south or north, when you get past KP1, although between KP1 and KP3, you're not considered to be all that likely to see much. That said, the best viewing I've ever had was a KP3, even compared to a recent KP9. So take it with a grain of salt. While it is an indicator, it is worth considering. It absolutely does not speak to the absolute odds of seeing a storm. And then we have what we call the BZ. The BZ is effectively the ability of the solar winds to reach the Earth. Really, it's their ability to come into interaction with the magnetosphere and ultimately cross through, come in, and this is where I'm not going to get too far into the weeds. Think of it like a door opening. Once it's negative, the door is officially cracked. It's starting to open, the solar winds can enter. The larger the negative number, the more you open the door and the more ability there is for the winds to come in, and that's where we start to see these storms. Then we have what we call the density, and this is just the density of the solar winds. Not going to get much more into it. A bigger number, again, is better. A couple of kind of tertiary variables that may honestly be the most important in some ways are going to be cloud coverage, Like this today, we're out because we can see the sky. There aren't clouds blocking things. That's absolutely essential. And then lastly, we have the moon cycle. So this one's really important because if we think about it, when the moon is much smaller in the sky, we see that sliver, things are much darker. That increases our ability to actually see the aurora itself. It's a bright object or bright presence amongst a dark scene. That's gonna help us. However, the darkest scene possible isn't always better. A little bit of moon can still balance out well with a good amount of aurora because it allows us to actually see our scene, see the world. And for photography specifically, that can actually be quite helpful for us. None of this means anything though if you can't find each of these variables and effectively track them. So I'm gonna show you guys 2 quick apps real quick that will really help you to be able to track each variable and give yourself a better odds of understanding where we're at in terms of the strength of a solar storm.
The first app is Aurora Alerts, and it gives great information and forecasted data for each variable we discuss. This is my favorite app to use as it helps explain everything you're looking at. The second app is Aurora Forecast, and its mapping system as well as extensive data helps you to understand the forecast quite well. I believe these apps pair very well together and they provide all the information you need. At any moment, the sun can release a bombardment of energized particles towards the Earth. And as they come into contact, exciting the oxygen, the helium, the nitrogen, and all the other particles in the atmosphere, we get a light show.
All right, so you're educated, right on. That's half the battle. That is where most people, go wrong. They don't put in the homework ahead of time to understand how it actually works. And that prevents them from, ever seeing the lights at all. Now the next part is gear. And first and foremost is warmth. You are going to be spending at least some, probably all of the night sitting out in the dark and most likely the very, very cold. That means gloves are going to be your best friend ever. And where I see people go wrong is they get these really big gloves to keep their hands warm, but then they can't actually use their cameras. So they have to take them off over and over and over again. And then there's really no point in having gloves at all because you're still fighting that freezing feeling the whole time. So gloves, very important. Then, look at me, I look like a sheep. You want a good jacket. You want something that's gonna be super warm that you can absolutely stay in all night. Same goes for pants, socks, underwear. I'm not gonna go on and on. Just get warm. One thing I want to mention while I'm walking around looking for a place to shoot is we're looking for ultimately the northern lights or the southern lights, right? So if it's the northern lights, we want to have a good view north. That means look for an unobstructed view. Now a subject like a mountain or a big scene is good, absolutely. But you got to consider that ultimately you need to have enough sky visibility to actually see the lights. The same goes for the south. If you're far south, make sure the southern view is at least somewhat unobstructed. So then we're left with kind of the fun stuff, right? This is the camera and the lens or lenses, the tripod and the tripod head. I think those are kind of like the core items. I think the camera is probably the least important. Ultimately, I prefer full frame. I think it does the best at letting in the most light with night sky photography. I find that it's the most effective, but there are great Aurora and night sky photographers using APS-C and Micro Four Thirds, so I think it's probably the least important choice. And then as far as your lens, what you're looking for is just the ability to capture as much of the scene as you specifically want to capture. That tends with an Aurora Borealis or Aurora Australis to be a lot of the scene because what you'll realize in person is that it's huge. It takes up almost all of the sky. So if you want any foreground, or if you want as much of the sky as possible, you're going to need a very wide lens. I prefer wide angle zooms like a 16 to 35, or in my case a 17 to 28 millimeter, but there's great prime lenses doing the job too. I mean, my dream lens right now is a 14 millimeter f1.8. A lot of people use 20 millimeters or 24 millimeters. The point is, you're gonna have a style and a preference, but generally speaking, wide and bright are gonna be the difference makers.
Now, as far as tripod and tripod head go, the key is a tripod that is stable enough to not vibrate in the wind, because those vibrations will be exacerbated with those long shutter speeds. When you're taking photos that are multiple seconds long at minimum, you start to realize that any sort of motion whatsoever, any instability in your system, it's going to show through and you're going to end up with blurry photos.
The last handful of things in your bag are the odds and ends that keep you going through the night. So this is going to be things like batteries. I always have at least 3 batteries, ideally 3 that are not in the camera, so 4 total. This is because when you're shooting Aurora, or when it's cold, or when you're doing long exposures, you burn through batteries pretty dang quickly. And then probably the single most important thing you can have is your headlamp. But there are some requirements. Not just any headlamp will do, because you need your headlamp to be able to do red light. Red light is very, very important because it keeps your eyes from adjusting. So when you get into the dark and you kind of have that cat-like feeling where suddenly you can see a little bit better, you can start to see the ground, you can see the sky, you're adjusted to everything. When you turn on a big bright LED, that goes away very quickly. Not to mention, if you're around anybody else that's shooting, you're going to ruin their shots if you shoot with a bright white light. So do not do that. The last thing you want to do is show up somewhere beautiful under an event that might only be lasting 45 seconds and ruin the shots of people around you. Oh man, this is just, it's so beautiful. I think one of the best parts of shooting something like Aurora or night sky photography is that you get to go outside and wait for it to come, and you often get just beautiful sunsets. And I'm feeling optimistic about tonight because we don't have a lot of clouds. There's a little bit of wispiness over there and some storms over there kind of way, way far, which is pretty far north. I'm not too worried about it, but it's something I'll be keeping an eye on. Doing a little bit of a time lapse here just to kind of take in the scene, enjoy what time I have. It'll be a little while before it's dark enough to even consider seeing Aurora. So this is a chance for me to go over some settings with you. And this is a little bit subjective, as is just about everything with photography and the creation of, visual art. But I'm gonna get into what I think works best. So step by step, let's start with ISO. And ISO, I usually put it between 800 and 3200. And this is gonna change just based on where your shutter speed ends up and where your aperture ends up. Next up is aperture, and this one's simple. I just keep it wide open, always. So if I have an f2.8, it's at f2.8. If I had an f1.4, it would be at f1.4. It's as simple as that. And then white balance. So white balance is a tricky one because it's something we often forget about. I think with white balance, the most natural look comes somewhere between 3200 and 4000 Kelvin. This gives it that kind of natural night sky look, a little bit more blue, teal, rather than the orange kind of unnatural washed out look you get in the 4000 to 6000 and above range. Once we get into the dark and we get into especially the colors of the Aurora, your camera is gonna start struggling really, really quickly to figure out what your white balance should be. So if you go with auto, it's more than likely not going to do a very good job.
Lastly, and most importantly, we have our shutter speed. We do not treat this like other night sky photography. If we use a shutter speed of 10, 20, 30 seconds, we will blur away the detail and the character that makes Aurora unique. This is why I prefer to stick between 1 to 5 seconds. Allow the Aurora to dance.
Lastly, I want to talk about focus. So focus is a real challenging thing, right? Your camera is not going to do a very good job at focusing on stars. So that means right out of the gate, you need to be going into manual focus.
Once you're in manual focus, I find that it's very important to set up focus peaking if your camera has it, or zebras. Basically just a visual indicator that shows what's in focus and what isn't. And then what I do is I use the zoom feature. Most cameras have this. It's gonna be like a little plus icon, whatever it may be. Zooming in as far as it can go, and then you put the box, that zoomed in box, over a star, or the moon even, but a star I think works best typically. You put it right over that, and then you play with your focus left and right until that star gets smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually it's a pinpoint. All right, and just as a quick example of the focusing technique, I have the frame on the moon here. I have focus peaking turned on, and it's in manual focus. So I'm gonna zoom in as tight as I can. I'm gonna bobble it left and right ultimately until I start to see it come into focus. Okay, I see it's a little bit sharper there, and I bobble it until it glows red based on the focus peaking effect. And I have hit focus there. Maybe hard to see on the screen, but we're good to go. So everything considered, I think it's kind of clear that Aurora photography, it's not all that different from landscape photography. You're trying to find creativity, you're trying to find balance, and you're trying to find a compelling way of framing your scene or your visual story. Part of the reason I love Aurora so much is the same reason I say I love adventure photography in general. It's dynamic, it's mobile, it forces you to think on the fly and to be creative in order to come away with anything at all, no less a good visual depiction of the scene. At this point, I'm not going to make you guys wait here with me for the rest of the night, so I'm going to let you go and I will show you how things go here in just a second.
The truth is that this time-lapse did not come from this night, as I was not able to successfully find Aurora during the filming of this video. However, during the recent solar storm, I was extremely happy with the results I got. This photo in particular was a dream photo, capturing all of the different particles burning from helium to nitrogen to oxygen, all while bringing in the southern Alps of New Zealand. And then to have an exposure to a corona, this was an extremely rare, extremely beautiful experience. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.